This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you very much for tuning into the program. It's Wednesday, May the 28th. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly. David Williams. He's produced the program. Let's get at it. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial to get in the queue and on the air, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 86. 26. So quick check-in on what is an ever-stiffening competition at the World Para-Hockey Championships. Liam Hickey and Team Canada, 4-2 victory yesterday against China. Even the States were up against it. They won 4-3 over Czechia. The playoff matchups have not been posted as of yet, but off we go towards what looks like Canada-USA once again for the gold medal. And for the NHL hockey fans, it's looking a lot like there's going to be a rematch of last year's Stanley Cup final. Both the Oilers and the Panthers have 3-1 leads in their series, so maybe, just maybe, the Cup could be coming back to Canada. First time since 1993. All right, sometimes, I struggle with whether or not we should bring up certain topics which may lead to people to peruse them further if they've never heard of them. We know that social media has led to some interesting awareness campaigns like the Ice Bucket Challenge, for instance. But then you get things like people being encouraged to eat Tide Pods and post it on their TikTok or whatever the case may be. And I don't know how common this has become so far in North America, but it's always worth, I think, checking in with our kids as to whether or not they're entertaining one challenge online or another. And this one comes from New Zealand. So apparently they are taking this from some of the action on the beloved All Blacks rugby field. So what they're doing is they're standing 20 meters apart from each other, running all out for an all-out collision. No protective equipment or anything on. And as a result, a 19-year-old is dead. So again, I'll admit the struggle with whether or not we should be broaching some of these issues, because if you haven't heard of it, now maybe unfortunately because of me, someone might go have a look at it. But all of those social media challenges, they become super popular. And they're spread far and wide, and they're probably very enticing to get a post that is liked or retweeted or whatever they call it on Instagram or whatever the case may be. But anyway, that's out there. All right. I saw this scroll by on social media once again, and then, interestingly, maybe the same person that emailed me saw exactly what I saw, and this was on Facebook. It's about when you go to the store and buy a tin of pop. So we all know it to be true, but sometimes, like for instance, if you pick one up and you're in your vehicle and maybe you don't clean the top of the soda pop tin, you could run into some particular problems. One of the bacteria that can indeed be shared, and does happen frequently, is leptospirosis. It's a bacteria caused by infected animals in their urine. So pretty gross topic, but it's always a healthy reminder, because you see the videos coming from some of the storage warehouses where the soda pop cans have been stored, waiting for distribution. And so maybe, just maybe, a friendly reminder to clean off the top of your tin. That was a weird one. Hearing from people in the neighbourhood around the Hoyles Escazoni complex here in the city of St. John's, right there, of course, on Portugal Cove Road. It's now set to be demolished, but even if we're talking about the demolition of that particular building and or other major developments are taking place, it's every single day, 7 days a week, I get emails and disgusting pictures of rats. So it is incumbent on developers, and or in this case the city, waiting for the demolition, for a real inspection to be done, and for rodent control, pest control companies to be contracted to do everything possible to keep what is the inevitable explosion of rats in the neighborhoods when the building comes down. So on behalf of the folks who are living there that send me emails all the time, they're worried. And we've spoken to the city council on this particular topic. And it's, once again, makes my skin crawl, but it's way out of control here in the city. I don't know what it's like where you live, but it is absolute madness here in St. John's. Anyway, here we go. Keep at it with the ATV. Spoke with Rick Noseworthy yesterday, the president of the Avalon Trailways Association. We hear from the RNC. There's a story in the news where 3 ATVers were spotted zooming around on the highway. Police went after them. One didn't cooperate. The other 2 took off. Consequently, when they were eventually caught, they face not only a ticket for their reckless use of their ATV, but fleeing from police. Communities, I can set my watch to it. every single year at this time of year, the concerns become very vocal about how many people are misusing or abusing their ATV. Whether it be unsupervised children and or people just roasting about and roaring around the communities where they probably should not be. So we're happy to take your call on that if that's something you're interested in. Let's go. Let's get into the grocery store. All right. Pretty interesting article I read this morning. A political scientist chiming in on this. Her name is Sarah Martin. She's talking about it, and this is a really good visual. She says the food supply chain is shaped more like an hourglass rather than a straight line. The group at the bottom are the feeders, the food producers are at the top. So we understand what the supply chain interruptions have made. But this one is really interesting when you take it from her point of view. If you look at the relationship between inflation and food inflation, there's a massive disconnect here. The big grocery store retailers seemingly are not inclined to see the prices come down, to prepare for potential economic shocks. But if you look at inflation itself, inflation in April, 1.7%. Way inside the Bank of Canada's sweet spot of 2%. Then you look at food inflation. Food inflation in April was up 3.8% when compared to April of last year. So what's going on here? We've heard from the Competition Bureau talk about the lack of competition, not only at the retail outlet space, but also in the world of distribution. And again, I think we're all painfully aware that when prices go up quickly, they don't come down as quickly, if at all. So how can we actually broach this issue? It's hard to hope that government picks winners and losers here, but just think about it. Inflation itself, 1.7%. Food inflation, 3.8% in April compared to April of last year. So it's an interesting way for Ms. Martin to look at it, talking about the supply chains and all the rest. But yeah, we've got a real tangled web here. And if you look at meat products, that is completely out of control. I mean, it's something like 16.7% hike in the world of buying meat. And lots of reasons for it. And some of the issues regarding trade and how many animals that are raised in this country sent to the United States, where there's some subsidized feedlots and for slaughterhouses, then we buy it back. And of course, when you apply some of the taxes and fees and tariffs, there's what you get. Anyway, we want to talk about it. Let's go. That's a big one. People point to the carbon tax, what it meant for food prices. And again, we're not seeing any of those reductions in costs reflected when you go to the grocery store. And things, if you hear from farmers, droughts and floods and fires and insects have been the most important impact to rising costs of groceries. Okay, on that front, we talk about things, and again, I'm going to keep going with this one, because if the Prime Minister's talked about reducing costs on Marine Atlantic to about half, let's see that done, and then let's carefully track what that means for the prices for the end consumer. Anyway, let's keep going. Sticking with transport. When I brought up the fact that Newfoundland Power has sent a 7-day notice of disconnection to the owners, which is the Diamond Group of the Stephenville Airport, a lot of eyes are rolling. I can hear them roll from sitting in this studio. But what's lost in that is we can disregard the lofty promises that were made in $500 million worth of investments, and Mr. Diamond's already facing some legal and financial struggles outside of the proposed big cargo drones and all the rest of it. But in the world of Medivac, of air ambulance, this is important. If all of a sudden the power is disconnected, if the bill is not paid, which of course many people who are just individuals get that type of threat as well, but let's see if we can get the numbers here. These are stats collected for the Health Accord and published in 2023. At that time, there were 290 ambulance flights to Stephenville over a 3.5-year period. That's about 7 flights a month. So preparing for what may indeed be coming is the inability for an air ambulance to land in Stephenville, talking about other airstrips that are close by, whether it be Deer Lake, St. Andrews in the Corduroy Valley, maybe having to use road transport, possibly having to use helicopters. So when people are saying, can you give up on the Stephenville airport business? Mentally, I have. But pragmatically speaking, it's still important, even if we're just talking about air ambulance service, because as we all know, Every second counts when you're trying to respond to an emergency, medically speaking. So, yep, the Stephenville Airport and return a commercial flight and all the rest of it, that's not happening. Certainly not under the current structure and ownership. But even just the air ambulance issue does mean that maybe the province has to look a little deeper into this issue itself. Maybe, just maybe, there's got to be a way, legally speaking, to remove ownership of the airport from the Diamond Group, who paid $6.90 for it, and then, of course, had to cover $1 million in liabilities. But the air ambulance service, that is a potential huge problem. Just 1 second, sip of coffee. All right. So there was a press conference yesterday talking about fire prevention or fire season preparedness. You know, it basically focused around your own home to keep things that could be highly flammable and contribute to a fire from some 30 meters from your home. In the world of the fire hazard rating, for folks in southern Labrador and the northern peninsula, the fire rating now is high to very high, extremely parts of Labrador. So now they've suspended all the burn permits. That's helpful information, of course, but there's also some approaches that we don't understand in full, but we can do what we can to protect our own property, our own home, our own garage or cabin. But I'm still hoping that the province can fill me in as to what they do in large scale for fire preparedness. And you've heard me mention this many times. Dealing with the fire load, the windfall in the forest themselves. Creating the fire breaks around communities to protect the communities as best possible. So, yes, we can give out the fire hazard ratings, and happy to do so. And hopefully that's helpful information for folks listening. And, yeah, the burn permits are suspended, so now you know, so don't do it. Still out to the folks in Adams Cove who are looking for further clarification or information from whether it be the federal government and availability of the Federal Disaster Assistance Fund and or what the province may or may not do to come to their financial aid. We don't have any information, but we're going to continue to trace it. All right. Public safety. So there's a Police Transformation Working Group at the Department of Justice. They just conducted a survey of 4,485 people from 240 towns across the province. Here's the thing. Without getting into every stat as a result of this survey, basically, people feel less safe than they did 5 years ago. Few things. When you hear from Minister Haggie talking about dealing with this and talking about enhanced police presence and the relationship between law enforcement and the community, which is important. If you think back, you know, community policing where the cop on the beat knew everybody's name and that relationship was much different than it is today. So we do know nothing slows you down quite like a police car. And we do know that the likelihood of a crime being committed when you know the police are right there and or you can see them reduces that potential. There's also the role of the media, and I'll lump myself in with it. The whole concept of if it bleeds, it leads has long been part of the media, and the very sensational crimes get the attention. They garner the headlines. I do it too. Even though I struggle with some very minor things about what we should or should not be talking about, it's hard to avoid the big, very dangerous and or evil crimes, and they get covered extensively. So the media is part of this, no doubt about it. You know, when we talk about interacting with police, it becomes just a sentiment. It's an emotion. It's human nature. Even if you've never had any interaction whatsoever with law enforcement, but if you see or read a story, or you hear stories about drug trade in one neighborhood or another, it seeps into our psyche. So whether or not people are actually less safe, but they feel less safe, and that's real. And that's understandable. So important comments, and Minister Haggie did make mention of, you know, how the media plays a role in this, and he's not wrong. Secondly, he goes on to say something which I think is probably pretty important. It's how the crime numbers, crime rates, different types of crime, property crime and otherwise, how they're reported. Because to put the facts out there could and will be helpful. Because now there's a feeling of being less safe. Whether or not people in different parts of the province, different cities and towns are actually less safe based on the data, important. Then when it comes to the interaction between people and law enforcement and the ability for there to be some investigation. There's new legislation that's been tabled here in the province called the Law Enforcement Oversight Commission Act. New procedures for people to file complaints. Good. Last one on that front. The whole concept of civilian oversight, which was a comprehensive report delivered by First Voice or First Light, I don't know what the hesitation is, to be honest with you. I think when we're talking about the way the public feels, if there was civilian oversight, I think that would add a different layer of comfort, knowing that that was in place. I don't know why law enforcement would be hesitant. It seems that would be quite helpful to them. And I think for the general public, it would also be quite helpful. But your thoughts are all that counts here on this program, so let's talk about it. All right. So the Progressive Conservatives, Mr. Wakeham, the leader of the party, the member for Stephenville Port-au-Port, saying that the province should hold off on moving towards definitive agreements regarding the Upper Churchill Memorandum of Understanding. And you know what's involved. He's talked about the ability, potentially, if there's such a thing as an energy corridor established, that would change the conversation regarding the Upper Churchill, Gull Island, and the transmission projects. And I don't know if this was what he meant to say, but he said, the ability for us to sell our power, whether it be into Quebec, whether it be into Ontario, whether it be into the northeastern United States, but he also mentioned the potential to sell it across the country, the hydroelectric power. That's probably not something that's real. In fact, we have a guest coming up a little later who wrote a very insightful piece in Maclean's talking about the East-West energy corridor, and most of it about electricity, because the energy loss over long distances really compromised the ability to sell the power too far afield from where it's produced. And hydroelectricity is interesting. It's hard to store, in large part. Batteries have advanced dramatically, but it almost has to be used simultaneously. So that's where proximity really counts here. So we'll get into some of the regulatory hurdles, and then you talk about the interview with the Prime Minister yesterday on the heels of the speech from the throne. Talk about interprovincial trade and what has to be done on that front, not ruling out pipelines, which I think is interesting, whether or not that's a real sentiment that the government will bring forward regarding policy. And in the world of trade, the amount that we sell, even just you think about electricity, last year we sold some $3 billion worth of electricity into the United States. And we don't have those relationships between the provinces. Then the regulatory barriers and the different ways things are set up, we've just got to get some federal leadership here to remove some of those barriers, remove some of those hurdles, because we could be much more self-sufficient and much more economically prosperous if we figured this out. As much as we've been told in years past it can't be done, it can be done. So we can get into that if you're so inclined. I don't know if you watched the speech from the throne yesterday. Seems to me there's an awful lot of focus on the person delivering the speech versus the speech itself. So yes, the king, for the first time since 1997, a monarch delivered the speech from the throne. For me, we can take on the role of the monarch if you're so inclined. But what's in the speech? It was pretty direct, pretty to the point. Not a whole lot of rhetorical flourishes, which sometimes dominates the speech from the throne. Yes, the pomp and circumstance associated with the king was something, and symbolically about our sovereignty and what have you. A lot of references to the Queen and her relationship with this country. And then getting into some of the nitty-gritty, which is, I think, the real important part here. Not who said it, but what it entails. Natural resource projects. Inside the speech said reduce approval time from 5 years to 2. That's something that's been asked about and asked of the government for years. The income tax cut, the fact that legislation has to be addressed regarding the actual elimination of the carbon tax for consumers, because now it's just reduced. It requires legislation because it was born of legislation. Then they're talking about real lofty ambitions about Canada Day, to get some of the internal trade barriers dealt with by then. Pretty short window, but pretty ambitious. Also on border security and national defense. With the upcoming NATO meeting, there is a distinct thought out there that the 2% of GDP on defense might become 5%, which is an amazing jump. Considering the fact that this country has never hit the 2%, talk about 5%. Then talk about bail reform, repeat offenders, domestic violence, what have you. Look, it all makes sense, especially in the world of bail. In this province, it begs one very fundamental question. Where are we going to put anybody? There's a lot of focus on Her Majesty's Penitentiary, and everyone knows why. It's overcapacity all the time. Some 60% of the folks incarcerated there have not been convicted of a crime. So I understand the public sentiment of making bail more difficult to get, but in realistic terms, you also need to put somewhere who's on remand. Like, where is that at this point? In this neck of the woods, it's just not a thing. But anyway, that was part of the speech as well. Then they talk about something the business community will not be very receptive to, but the general public possibly more so. And that's the immigration cuts. Whether it be with targeted skill immigration, whether it be with a temporary foreign worker program in an effort to stabilize immigration, the fact of the matter is, the government itself, with the numbers that they were welcoming into the country, was too quick, too fast, too many. Immigration, though, if you ask the business community, spending overall is up, but that's based on population. It's a per-person spend. The numbers coming down will make it difficult for businesses to hire in some sectors. It will also see a reduction in spending, obviously. So that'll be welcomed by people who are really concerned with immigration and immigration numbers. But insofar as the economic impact might be and the availability of people to be hired with an aging workforce in certain sectors, the numbers are dramatic. So if you want to take on anything that you heard in the speech, whether it be about housing and the Build Canada First or all the rest of it, and yes, the person who delivered it, we can take it on. Oh, and regarding sovereignty. So we were told by the American ambassador, Pete Hoekstra, some while back that people can stop talking about annexation in the 51st state, And then yesterday, again, the president said it again. You know, talk about a $61 billion price tag to join the Golden Dome missile defense system. He said it'll cost $61 billion for the country to get involved with the Americans on that front. But if we become the 51st state, again, with that ridiculous nonsense, then he said it would cost nothing, which, of course, there's no such thing as costing nothing. We're also talking about joining the European or the EU Defense Pact, which is going to cost some $1.2 trillion. So there's a lot there to consider. As usual, we're on Twitter. We're VOCM Open Line. You can follow us there. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back, let's have a great show. That means you're in the queue to talk about whatever's on your mind. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line number 3. Say good morning to Canadian Federation of Independent Business Senior Policy Analyst. That's Sue Rin. Good morning, Sue Rin. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning to you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
We've been focusing on interprovincial trade like most of the country has in the recent months. You know, we talk about different trucking regulations and whatever the case may be, exemptions carved out to protect jobs. But labour mobility is going to be a key feature here if we're going to get this right. Where should we start the conversation? Because there are some distinct issues, whether it be trying to deal with workers' compensation boards or otherwise. Where would you like to start on this focus?
Absolutely. Workers' compensation and all those things add up. And labor is one of the areas that we are seeing where the progress in a lot of the provinces seem to be stalling a little bit. For example, BC not including labor in their interprovincial bill, as well Manitoba making it a point to not include labor in their bill as well. From our survey of small businesses, we are seeing that have experienced challenges when they've tried hiring or have hired from other provinces or territories. So we'd really like to see them starting from a point of, recognizing certifications between jurisdictions, making sure that the process of certifying and reapplying for licensing and registration, et cetera, are streamlined.
Here's what gets complicated for me, and you probably know much more about it than I do, obviously, is workers' compensation boards across the country have very similar, if not the same mandates, but they have vastly different structures. So is this a requirement or the potential for there to be one structure, one focus, one setup at workers' compensation boards, because they are really different across the country, making the issue is what it is today?
That's exactly right. You say you don't know that much, but that's point on. So workers' compensation usually is vastly different right across the country, and that is why a lot of businesses, when they're having to re-register, reapply to workers' compensation, when they're wanting to expand to different provinces or territories, that's where they run into the frustration, because they're having to keep so many different paperworks in their filing system. They're having to make sure that they're on top of making sure that they are complying when they're applying to different jurisdictions. For example, Ontario and Manitoba, they're so close together, or Ontario and Quebec, like Ottawa and Gatineau, it's a 10-minute drive, but then it's so different when you're having to apply. The exemption rules are different as well. Just when you can apply is different to, just the requirements and et cetera.
There's one point that's made in the news release from your organization. It might seem like a silly thing, but I think it's emblematic of exactly what we're talking about. A Red Seal certified stylist from Newfoundland and Labrador cannot legally use the titles hairstylist or hairdresser in New Brunswick. They have an actual regulatory body in that province. We don't. So people don't want to be over-regulated. We don't have the government looking down at every single employee, talking about designations, what have you. But that speaks to a variety of trades, a variety of skills across the country, where if we don't have a level, understandable playing field, then how and why would someone from this province who does my hair want to work in New Brunswick? Because they can't. What has to be done on that front? Because that seems like a silly thing, but I think that speaks to the larger problem.
Exactly. That's why we are asking provinces to, make sure that they're working with associations as colleges, because associations and colleges, they do sort of act as gatekeepers, into entry in a lot of professions. So we're asking them to work together with them to make sure that, streamlining their timelines for registrations or recertifications, as well as making sure that the fee that they're having to put up is reduced or eliminated as much as possible.
Balance is going to be an important word here. So, especially for your members, talk about certainty, looking at investment down the road. And lack of certainty means lack of investment. Also for the protection of jobs. So that's why some of the exemptions have been carved out. For instance, in this province, they talk about the two big beer breweries. If trade was open up in the beer business, maybe those breweries would close. So one thing to be able to hire someone, but quite another for that business to remain viable with the mobility that's suggested. So is there a sweet spot, and how should we consider that word of balance?
That's a really interesting word, balance. I think that's one of the things that all governments across Canada are trying to figure out, and that is kind of why we're seeing, like you said, the carve out of certain things, like, oh, this is off limits in my country, this is off limits in my territory, kind of a thing. But of course, what we've been telling them is these are the kinds of barriers that are holding Canada's economy back. It's holding back our ability, small businesses' ability to expand, if they're wanting to expand as well. It's, just sheltering them unnecessarily at times, Smaller businesses, they could be more impacted when they're exposed to more competition, but it also opens the floor up for them to remain competitive as well. I mean, we're seeing American liquor being pulled off the shelves, right? I mean, I don't think there's a better time than now to introduce Canadian beer into our retail shelves, and what better way to know, what's going on in other provinces or territories without, opening up the barriers.
And even in that world, there's different strategies or policies province to province. I can go to a corner store or a gas station here in this province to buy beer. In many other provinces, I can't. So even access to shelf space is one of those tricky pieces of business. We all live in a very 3-foot world. Oh, not everybody, but a lot of people do. It's looking out for number one, protect your interests, whether it be in your own city or town, your own province. So it's hard to have a mindset for, political policies to be popular is what's in the national best interest versus what's in my best interest. And that's when the government's talked about introducing legislation by Canada Day to eliminate federal barriers. That might be one piece of the puzzle, but how do we get provincial leaders to understand national best interest and how that can work for them? Because they answer to their own electorate. They don't. If you're a Premier of Newfoundland, you don't answer to the Premier of Nova Scotia. But national best interest, it's hard to quantify, and it's hard to craft that message, which really makes it easily understandable, as opposed to, hey, that might remove some opportunities for me in this province, but somewhere down the line it creates another opportunity.
Of course, absolutely. It creates more opportunity for a lot of people. So that's what we're just hoping to see from all sorts of governments across the country. Ontario, I mean, for example, they're doing a great job. I mean, they eliminated all of their CFT exceptions, and, I think that creates great headway for a lot of provinces to follow, as well as the federal government. They're telling us that they're going to remove all of the CFTA exceptions by Canada Day. That's great to hear. We know it can be done because Ontario did it.
You want to break down the acronym of CFTA for the listener?
Oh, for sure. It's the Canadian Free Trade Agreement.
Right. I just want to make sure everyone knew what we're talking about. Anything else this morning, Sue Rinn, before we say goodbye?
I think right now everyone knows, and all Canadians are kind of still keeping up with the message, elbows up. But CFIB, when we did our research last year, we found that for every dollar you spend at a local business, 66 cents stays, versus when you spend at a multinational, only 11 cents stays. So, keep your local economy flourishing, stay shopping local. It's the best way to invest in Canada as well as Canadians.
It's nice to have you on the show. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye. So Renew, the CFIB senior policy analyst in a provincial trade, it's remarkable to me. If I was bringing this up 8-10 years ago, I'd be told it can't be done. And now all of a sudden, apparently you can? Wow. Let's take a break. When we come back, Sean's in the queue with a terrible story about his son who was assaulted in school. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Good morning, Sean. You're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How are you this morning?
I'm doing okay. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm doing okay, but we've got a little bit of an emotional story and high stress. And so before I start, I first want to say that this is regarding an incident that took place at Brookside Intermediate regarding my son. I first want to say that NL schools and Brookside Intermediate have been nothing but excellent and supportive. So it's not related to the schools and how they've handled it, because they've done everything in their power, and the same with the RNC. On January 29th, an unfortunate incident took place. My son, who has autism, his student assistant, or a male student assistant, I shouldn't say his student assistant, a male student assistant. Basically, this is what took place. My son was walking past the doorway. We don't have the audio. My son said something in passing. The student assistant became enraged. He grabbed a hold of my son by both ears, lifted him up. I don't know what he said aggressively. So my son lifted up so that he was on his tippy toes, and then he shoved him. My son walked away, and that in itself was the assault. The reason I'm able to say what exactly took place is because I've seen the surveillance video. So once that took place and it was realized by the school, then NL school reported it, and he was arrested and charged on February 20th. He was supposed to put in a plea on yesterday on May 26th, and instead they set it back. So to this point or whatever, there has been no media on this. There has been no, like I said, we've had the support of the school, the RNC, NL schools and all that, but nothing has been brought to light on it. So he's been walking around our community. He only lives 2 streets up from me. There's been no recourse except just going through the process. He's still receiving his pay, and if he continues to keep offsetting it, he'll get a retirement. He'll get his pension when he turns 55. And that's what I needed to bring to attention today, because there is no attention been brought to it.
What exactly do you mean by attention? So is this just what is a pretty slow court system, or what kind of attention? Because for starters, I'm really sorry to hear that happen to your child. I mean, that's inexcusable to begin with. But bring attention to what? Speeding up the court process, or what exactly are you hoping this morning, Sean?
Well, the thing is that, first of all, there's 2 parts to it. Yes, in the sense that this could continue on for years. But our family was hugely affected by this. This caused a lot of stress. We thought about even moving out of the community, let alone the stress that has been put on my son and what he had to endure. He also, because of this person worked with him for like 2 years, and he was able to get the bus to school every day. Now he hasn't been able to do that. The thing is that I guess as a father, and you want to protect your son, you want to be there for your child, you want to be able to do what when you put them in the hands of somebody else. As long as it proceeds in the courts and justice is served, yes. But in saying all of that, he's walking around with a paycheck, And like I said, he will continue on for the next year if he can offset it, and then he will retire with his pension after assaulting a child in our school system.
There's a lot to that. You know, it reminds me of when law enforcement officers are charged with one thing or another. Like, for instance, in the Snellgrove case, he was still officially Constable Snellgrove until he was convicted and went through the process. This all boils down to collective bargaining. So the teachers' union would have negotiated with the province that for instances like this, the person remains on the payroll until convicted, and then there's a next step to the process. Maybe, just maybe, it's a bit wiser. If circumstances like this happen, then people are suspended without pay, and if they're found to be not guilty in a court of law, then we can give them their retro pay. But at least we have some protection for families like yours, and an additional layer of comfort knowing that there is not a paycheck coming to someone who on video grabbed a child, whether or not they're on the spectrum or not is one part of it, but grab a child by the ears and hoist them into the air. Probably a paycheck is not the best thing to be flowing to that person.
100% agreed. And I mean, it's just one of these things, like, if we don't discuss it and we don't get it out there, then it just goes by the wayside and no one hears about it. And this individual just silks right on through and there's no discussion whatsoever. So that's my biggest reason for bringing the attention to it. And, like, we're going to deal with it as we're going to deal with it, and we're going to go through the process that we need to go through the process. And, you know, like I said, we've had a highly supportive school. We've got a highly supportive community and friends. Like I said, it's not something that I want to be out pushing in the media, but, you know, we've reached a point where it's just that I felt it was at that point that I had to say something. And like I said, it's all about protecting my child and protecting other kids too, because the thing is that these type of things shouldn't go unnoticed. They should be out there. They should be out there and you know, like I said, justice should be served.
No argument here, Sean. I'm glad you did call this morning to shed some light on this, and I hope you and your family are doing okay.
I appreciate the opportunity today, Patty, and you have a great day.
You too.
Thanks again.
Stay in touch.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
A terrible story. And on video, so nothing quite like going to the tape. A quick one on education. Karen, you stay right there. She talked about accessibility issues downtown here in St. John's, I assume. So the contract has been awarded for the new Kenmount Terrace School. Now, of course, we've got questions about timeline. They're talking about being open for this September 2026. Zoning issues still continue. Larkhall Academy, Larrysbrook Junior High, current populations likely exceed capacity. Larrysbrook in particular is going to start next school year with 600 students. Now they're working on turning the cafeteria and library into teaching spaces. No outside play area, no cafeteria, no library, combined gym classes with over 50 students in the gym. Not ideal. Let's take a break. When we come back, Karen's here to talk about accessibility. There's a caller also in the queue who wants to talk about her daughter abandoned by an ambulance or stranded by an ambulance. I'm not sure what that means, but we'll find out. And Ed wants to talk about what we see far too often in common, needles discarded. This time, playgrounds. Don't go away. Welcome back. One point of clarification. So student assistants are not represented by the NLTA. They're represented by NAPE. So it wouldn't have been the teachers union negotiate anything. It would have been the representatives at NAPE, just to be accurate. Let's keep going here. Let's go to line number 2. Karen, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. How are you?
Doing okay. How you doing?
Good. I had a visit home a couple years ago, and I took my mother, who was in a wheelchair, down to the downtown market. And it was funny this morning, I was listening, that the city all of a sudden says they're accessible. I tried to go to almost every store in the marketplace, and the only store that was accessible by wheelchair was always in vogue. Very disappointing.
Yeah, so I did not hear that comment directly. Was the reference to the entirety of the downtown, or was it to the pedestrian mall businesses and restaurants in particular? Because that was the initial concern, is when they put out those patios or what have you, many of them found out a little bit too late in the day that they were not accessible. So was the reference to every storefront, or was it more specific than that? I don't know. I'm asking you because I did not hear it.
Yeah, we tried to go into many stores, and there was one or two restaurants. None of them had a ramp for a wheelchair, except always in vogue.
It's remarkable this day and age that we're still missing the target on accessibility, because we're not just talking about a small percentage of folks who need those mobility supports and or ramps and or all of the other issues inside the business once you actually get in the business. And we're talking about a third of the population here, and of course that's in the world of disability. Not all of that means you have a mobility concern, but still, for business to understand that there is a significant percentage of the population willing to spend money at your place of business, and they can't and they won't if they can't access it.
Exactly. Very disappointing in this day and age.
Yeah. I mean, I think some business owners maybe are very wise to it when they design or when they put their patios out, for instance, in the summertime. And others, I don't think necessarily, and I'll get your reaction to this, I'm not so sure it's just they don't care. I just don't think they think about it. Like if they themselves don't need any additional supports or they don't have someone belong to them that does, maybe they are just a little bit oblivious until it's pointed out to them, and then they'll do what's required, if possible, to rectify the situation. But I'm hoping that what I said is accurate, that it's not a matter of not caring, it's just a matter of not being aware or not aware enough.
Totally agree. And I wrote emails to whoever I could think of, the mayor, councillors, the tourism, and they all came back, and I said in my email, put yourself in a wheelchair and try to get around downtown. See how accessible, see how easy it is. It's not at all. And I've got one reply, and I must have sent at least a dozen emails.
Not good. And I don't know why people continue to do that as well. Even if you don't like the answer, it's better than nothing.
Exactly.
Karen, anything else you'd like to say this morning?
No, sir. Thank you very much.
I appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And, add to it, I think we reached out to Blair Curtis. He's a call to the bar, new lawyer, and for the first time in over 30 years, the call to the bar ceremony isn't going to be at Supreme Court. Why? Because Mr. Curtis is in a wheelchair and can't get in there. And again, I do think that's the case, is that unless it's something you have lived experience with, then you probably don't think about it a lot. And people have busy lives and busy worlds and complicated businesses, all the rest of it. That's not an excuse. It's just that sometimes people need to be made aware of something and to heighten said awareness so that you can attend to it appropriately. Let's go ahead and keep rolling here. Let's go to line number 4. Caller, you're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Patty. How are you today?
I'm okay, thank you. How about you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm been tormented over this the last few days. I've never called into open line before, but I only know of this situation because I was involved in it. I have a daughter who's a nurse. She doesn't speak about work outside of work, so I don't know how often this happens. I have heard it has happened before, but I guess like you just said from your last caller, unless you're involved, you don't realize. So I want to speak about the ambulatory service from a bit of a different perspective, as from a nursing side. So a few nights ago, my daughter was on night shift, and she had to do an ambulance run at 10 p.m. to a hospital about an hour and 15 minutes from here. So at 1 a.m., she phones me at my house and asks me, can I go to her house to stay with her children so her husband can go pick her up? So apparently when they went with her, the patient, I'm assuming the patient was admitted, the ambulance was released to leave, and they weren't going back to her hospital. She had to find her own way to go back to work. She was told there were no taxis after midnight at this community that she was in. The ambulance was going as far as Dildo. So whether they were going back to their base or back on another run, I don't know. So she had to get her husband to pick her up from work at that hospital to return her to work at her other hospital to finish her shift. So one issue would have been the safety of our nurses getting in a taxi with a stranger in the middle of the night on the highway where there are many areas of non-service between these two hospitals. Number 2, having to be at work and to be left to your own devices in the middle of the night. Had we not been available for her husband to go get her, would she have had to stay there? And then would our hospital be left without a nurse for the rest of that shift? till 7:30 in the morning.
Two good questions.
So,
can you remind me of the two communities that we're talking about here?
Placentia is the community where she works.
Yeah.
And Carbonear was the community that she went to on the ambulance.
So whether or not there's taxis on the road or whether or not the ambulance was only going part way is only part of the issue here. If my work sends me somewhere, it's my work's responsibility to get me back, whether it be in an ambulance or the janitor comes and gets me or whatever needs to take place, as opposed to me left to my own devices and lucky enough that their husband was available. So if work sends me somewhere, work got to bring me back.
I think work, from what I understand, because it's really hard to get her to speak about work outside of work. So most of what I've gathered here is from the situation, myself and her husband. But they pay for your taxi. I guess you submit the taxi pay and NL Health or whoever will pay for that. But that's not really good enough if you can't get a taxi. Plus putting yourself in that safety situation in the middle of the night is really not acceptable.
Yeah, because it's one thing for them to give you back the money if you spent it on the taxi out of your own pocket. But again, if there's no taxi, then that's really irrelevant.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we had a privately ambulance service here in Placentia that was marvelous. And so I guess the nurses would always be brought back, or all whatever medical staff was on the ambulance, because their base was here. So I don't know that ambulances still work out of that place, but I think with the new system, they just go where they can go wherever they're summoned. Is that correct?
Pretty much. There are some regions with which the ambulance are contained, so to speak, but it's different than it was in the years past. That's true. We have, I guess, what they call the hub and spoke, right? So, yeah, we would have a certain amount of geographical distance that one ambulance center would cover or one base would cover. But, like, for instance, I had a friend of mine needed an ambulance in Mount Pearl, and the ambulance came from, oh my goodness, where was it? Avondale or something. So it's pretty far afield, but your daughter's circumstance, it would be nice if you could pry out of her exactly what the reaction is at work. I'd be curious to hear.
She won't talk about work.
Amazing.
She doesn't bring home work at all. I don't know anything about somebody will tell me that that my daughter was their nurse today, but I would never hear that from her.
And simply because we don't have your name on the airwaves, I feel like it's okay to ask you this question. Do you happen to know why she is like that? Is it that she wants to leave work behind so she can decompress, or she sees so many traumatic things, or what do you think it is?
I guess I think it's just because I guess the privacy of patients and what goes on at work stays at work. I'm assuming I was like that when I worked. So she kind of leaves work where it's to. And she doesn't complain about it, really. And I don't know,
Yeah.
Do they get reprimanded if they speak outside of work? I don't know. She's just not like, she just doesn't do that.
I try to leave my job behind when I go home, but it's impossible. I wish it wasn't.
Yeah. And she, I don't know if she speaks to her husband about it or not, but she doesn't speak to me about it.
That's interesting in and of itself. But if you ever get, by chance, any information as to how her workplace reacted, I'd be really curious to know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I can almost guarantee you that probably has happened before. Like I said, I had heard that it had happened before.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I can guarantee you that there's nobody happy about that.
Yeah, because healthcare's not on banker's hours. So, absolutely, it's happened in the past. I appreciate the time.
Nobody has it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
I appreciate yours. All the best. Bye-bye. That's a strange one. If work sends me somewhere, work's got to get me back out of it, regardless of what it takes. Let's take a break. Ed, appreciate your patience about to talk about needles that are discarded. In this case, playground garbage. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 5. Ed, you're on the air.
How you doing this morning?
Doing okay. How about you?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad. Kind of a bit of a shock there on Monday morning there. Apparently, an individual, from, I don't know from what location, brought on their backs a large garbage bag to the West End Park, opened it up, and in the bag, which we found out because the park workers come to me wondering what was going to go up in the park with the bag, and I'm like, don't know nothing about it. It goes up there. To my dismay, and their shock on their faces, I was like, okay, what's going on? Is it something really, really bad up there? Didn't know, right? You were like kind of frightened to death. I'm like, okay, so it was up. Here's someone took bag from somewhere. I'm assuming it was commercial garbage, I'm guessing. I don't know. But the amount of needles, the amount of sterile packages that they use for doing meth, and the meth pre-packaged stuff that they just smoke drugs with, in this bag, like, all over the place. Like, if you see this, there's, the containers that you put the diabetic needles and stuff into? There was more in this bag than it was in one of those containers. Now, this is in a park where kids play. And I know for a fact that one of the kids had to be over there because I found one of those plastic vials that they have the sterile water over by one of the slides. So a child was near this. Now, I don't know who the hell the individual was. Apparently, and honestly, it's going to have to matter in some particular way. Someone's going to have to be accountable for whoever the hell done this, obviously. But I mean, you're bringing a garbage bag which is full of needles and all this stuff for drug use in a park. You open it up, and there's smoke and the stuff there and then when they open up this bag, and everything's going everywhere.
Yeah. I wonder, is this a case of somebody who's just trying to clean up to protect folks who, whether it be pets or kids, from picking it up, picked them up and then just went to put them in the closest garbage container? I don't know. But it seems like a strange thing to do, especially when you select a playground garbage container.
No. This bag was brought into the area from an individual all dressed in black, which is on video, coming from God knows where, down the street. You're talking about like over 500, almost 1,000 meters away on video, and coming in the park, and you could clearly see they're opening up this bag because there's stuff flying after the fact when this bag is completely sealed and the bag is ripped open and all this drug paraphernalia is in this particular garbage bag, right? Okay,
so where did it end up? On the ground or in the garbage can?
All over the ground, right next to the community center that's there, that has not been used for literally almost a decade now.
Well, then that person's an idiot.
Yeah, more than that.
Yeah, probably. Right? Yeah.
My advice to anybody that's bringing their child to the park, for the love of God, look around the area first. Look around the area and make sure there's no drug paraphernalia, any drug stuff anywhere at all. If you see these little blue vials that says sterile water on it, which is a little tiny vial, that's for drugs. Look around for needles, those packages, because you don't know what is on these packages, right? Don't touch them, or get a tissue paper or something if you got to, and for the little plastic pieces. But if it's the needles, then the authorities got to be informed right away. The city worker crews, they had to call up a garbage truck with shovels and rakes and everything in order to clean this mess up. There was literally 4 of them up to trying to clean this up. This was not no small little mess. This was a massive mess of drug paraphernalia all over the place, let alone garbage too. And they even found a resume with somebody's name on it. So hopefully the resume may turn it back to whoever has had this bag in the first place, or maybe the individual who even brought it there in the first place. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, what the motivation is beyond me, but it's a strange story. And obviously, it's simple to say it shouldn't happen, but obviously it shouldn't. For city property, call the city. For school grounds, call the province. There's some protocols in place for people to come and pick things up so that you don't have to. And some people are wary of picking up, whether it be a discarded needle or other drug paraphernalia, and I understand that. Ed, I'm glad you told us about it, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, if it's possible, and we know this is going to happen because it's this time of the year now with people kicking around in parks, if the city itself or the police or anybody can get phone numbers together for the public to phone in order to call in these problems, because we know it's a problem. Everybody knows the problem. We've dealt with this before. So if an individual itself has found this particular stuff on the ground somewhere to call a number or numbers in order to get something cleaned up on this. I mean, all depending where it's due. Like the other day, I left Walmart and went to buy a car and realized after the fact that I didn't know, there's literally a needle and a crack pipe literally underneath my feet before I got in my car. And I was like, what the hell? I stepped on this before I didn't see it. And this is right next to the carts that you put the carts to. And this is literally as soon as you step out of your vehicle, and I didn't notice it until I got back in the vehicle.
Yeah, insofar as numbers to call, if it's city managed and owned property, 311 is fundamental as that. For the private buildings and parking lots like Walmart, you have to deal directly with them because the province nor the city are going to do anything in that scenario. So if it's a city owned park, then it's 311 in the city of St. John's. For other communities, I'm not really sure what number should be called, but I suppose we can compile a list if that could be helpful to the listening public. I appreciate the time, Ed. Thanks for the call.
You too. You have a good day yourself, and
you too.
Hopefully nobody will get hurt by this.
Hope not. Take care. Bye-bye. And people will ask questions about, why are we putting out things like these red needle containers for safe disposal? Well, for the obvious reason, so that if someone is inclined to do so, they can put it in one of the red safe containers. But as we know, if you're in the throes of addiction and you're using intravenous drugs, good decision making is probably not a normal course of your day-to-day activities, right? So it is worthwhile to be mindful as pet owners, as parents, that even the innocent trip to the park could go sideways in a hurry. So, I guess incumbent on parents of especially very young children to make sure that where their kid is playing is not littered with these discarded needles. So it's becoming it's all too common. Let's see here. Let's get to the break. When we come back, World No Tobacco Day is May 31st. Join us on the line is Dr. Leslie Phillips, professor at the School of Pharmacy at Memorial University and the director of the Smoking Cessation Program. Dr. Phillips is next, then you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number one. Let's take a word to Dr. Leslie Phillips, professor at the School of Pharmacy at Memorial University and director of the Smoking Cessation Program. Good morning, Dr. Phillips. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Good morning to you.
World No Tobacco Day is coming up May 31st, and there are a lot of topics related to that we could talk about. Today, what I want to bring up really is the tobacco settlement. And I'm sure, as our listeners are aware, there's been some discussion from the opposition about the fiscal appropriateness of the government's plan to earmark the entirety of the recent settlement to offset the 2025-2026 debt. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I think we are forgetting the most important part of all this, and that's the individuals who smoke, because they are the ones who will be paying for this settlement money as it is coming from sales profit. And they will also be paying for it, Patty, with their health and with their lives over the duration of that payment period. And Newfoundland will receive, once legal fees are deducted, about $400 million over the next 20 years, including a lump sum payment of about $99 million up front. What I'd like to do, if you'll permit me, is make a case for why we should all be supporting redirecting a substantial portion of that money towards prevention and cessation.
Sure, and when the Canadian Cancer Society came out saying pretty much the same thing, my immediate thought was that money, based on government's accounting practices, has been spent. I mean, even though it's not in hand, it has been spent. So any monies that would be redirected would simply be from general coffers. I'm not trying to split a hair, but government has already put that money in one spot to 1 year's deficit, even though we're going to be waiting 2-3 decades for the remainder of the $400 million, because you're right, you have to back out $125 for legal fees. So how would that money get spent? Because it's not that long ago, government toyed with the idea of smoking cessation tools to be offered to folks who, for instance, were low income. earners. But of course, lung cancer or any related cancer with tobacco, they don't know how much money you make. So where do we start with this type of program that you think is the best idea?
Well, let me start before, and I do want to get into that, but I would say that this government has declared health a priority. The Premier himself has said healthcare is a top priority for his agenda. The Minister of Health and Community Services has said prevention is essential. And Newfoundland has set a goal to move closer to becoming Canada's healthiest province by 2031. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that that is impossible without addressing nicotine use. And let me tell you why. Because, first of all, Newfoundland has the highest provincial smoking rate in Canada. Smoking is the leading preventable cause of morbidity and mortality in Canada and in Newfoundland. It's responsible for 1 in 5 of all deaths. And if you think it's just lung cancer and COPD, well, you're wrong. Smoking goes everywhere in the body. So there are multiple other cancers, including colon cancer, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, heart disease, stroke, blood clots, poor diabetes control, hip fractures, infertility, miscarriages. I could go on and on. But essentially, Patty, smoking kills 1 in 2 smokers. So right now, we have about 67,500 residents in our province who smoke. And half of them will die prematurely from smoking-related disease if we do nothing.
Fair enough. And I wasn't trying to just make it about lung cancer because you're absolutely right. The trick here will also be, not only how addictive nicotine is and how deadly nicotine can be, but when you're up against the manipulative forces of big tobacco, even though their influence has been reduced, financially speaking, dramatically over the past few decades, they still have campaigns that really get into people's heads. We've done things like put warnings on packages of tobacco. We hide them behind cupboards or doors these days, but they still have some tricky business up their sleeve.
They sure do, Patty, and I mean, they're up to a lot of their old tricks, really. Particularly now with these new alternative tobacco and nicotine products. They've got all these flavors, they got bright colors, they got these techie devices, most recently these disposables that are getting larger and larger that, deliver tremendous amounts of nicotine, 600 milligrams of nicotine in some of those. Patty, that's 30 packs of cigarettes, and they're on social media, and they're not depicting older smokers who are trying to quit. They're depicting young people having a good time and using these products. So they're up to their old tricks for sure. And we're spending as a province, just our direct healthcare costs alone, and I think Rob mentioned this, but $123 million in 2020 we spent on tobacco costs. That's higher than we spent on alcohol, by the way. And that doesn't include another $136 million for productivity losses. We can't afford to do nothing.
So what does a program look like? Because, it took decades. We disallowed tobacco companies from sponsoring sporting events like the Des Maurier Golf Open. We took them out of all sorts of advertising opportunities they had. And we did the warnings and we hid the smokes away and all the packages look the same. So where's the next steps in cessation programs or awareness campaigns or whatever the right phrase is?
Well, if I had the money, I think I'd put it towards 3 initiatives. So regulation, education, and cessation support. So regulation and education are about prevention, and then, of course, cessation support to help people who are already using to quit. So, the government put a bunch of options on the table last May. I thought they were all great, and I'd like to see some movement on some of those. So things like raising the minimum age to purchase tobacco and nicotine products to 21. We know that has been done elsewhere and has been proven effective. This notion notion of a tobacco-free generation, banning industry incentives to retailers. You know, they get all kinds of incentives for selling tobacco and vaping products. Banning flavors and sweeteners in vapes. I think we should talk about banning these disposable vapes, or, you know, limiting their size, restricting sales to licensed retailers only. No vending, no internet sales. You know, Quebec has done that. Youth vaping is really fueling the next nicotine epidemic. And, you know, for every 3 youth who try vaping, 1 will become a daily user.
Right. And you just mentioned, smoke-free generation. South Australia, if you are born on or after January 2007, you can never buy it, the product, which is remarkable. And you mentioned the internet and what have you. That's some of the concerns you hear from different advocacy groups about things like banning flavors for the vapes and or banning the sale of tobacco. You really find yourself up against it when you talk about the black market, whether it be in a van behind the trade school or on the internet, because you can buy illegal contraband, including tobacco products and vapes, with the very simple click of a mouse. Is it actually possible to police that world? I mean, government is already pretty heavy-handed in some of these arenas. So how do you combat that? Because that's there today. With one quick Google, I can find myself illegal contraband cigarettes and have them delivered right to my door.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big issue, but we actually don't spend that much on enforcement. So obviously, any regulation is only as good as the enforcement behind it. You know, we're never going to eliminate it completely, but it certainly is possible to crack down. And I'll tell you something. You talk about industry tactics. Well, raising the fear about contraband is one of the ways in which the tobacco industry actually seeks to keep itself alive. In fact, they were charged and convicted of doing just that. I think it was back in the 1990s, where they facilitated the transport of their product across the border into the U.S. and then back again as illegal contraband product. So the tobacco industries love to talk about and stoke the fear of contraband. And, the best way to manage contraband, in my opinion, besides enforcement, is to reduce demand. Well, how do you reduce demand? By regulation, by education, and by getting current smokers and nicotine users to quit. So, the other big piece of this is education. We have to equip parents and teachers with the tools to engage honestly and effectively with youth. We need stuff that's education-based, that's honest, that talks about what we know and we don't know, that's engaging, that's interactive, that talks about the tactics that the industry uses to entice and dupe youth, and opportunities for them to practice problem-solving skills, such as how to say no. And we're actually working on that in Newfoundland right now, and it's starting in grade 4, believe it or not. Cessation support, we have so much work to do there, Patty. Our current services, quit services, are under-resourced, and many of them have long wait lists. So my program, my wait list, and I'm only 1 day a week, my wait list is 52. Newfoundland Health Services smoking program, extremely under-resourced. It's only available in a few select locations. That needs to be throughout NLHS. My colleagues in the cancer and lung screening program, I know, have long wait lists. Smokers want to quit, but they need help.
Appreciate the time, Dr. Phillips. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you, Patty. This is a historic opportunity for us, to invest in the long-term health and therefore the financial sustainability of our province. Prevention efforts now mean fewer sick people, lower future healthcare costs, and a healthier province by 2031. We're not going to get there unless we deal with this leading preventable cause of death and disease.
Appreciate your time, Dr. Phillips. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Dr. Leslie Phillips,
Bye.
Professor at the School of Pharmacy at MUN, Director of the Smoking Cessation Program. Let's take a break. When we come back, Juanita wants to respond to the caller, talk about her daughter, a nurse, was stranded, and Jackie wants to talk about something Henry was dealing with yesterday, lack of mental health and addiction services on the Burin Peninsula, right? Right. Let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Good morning, Juanita. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Morning.
I'm calling with kind of a complaint, I guess, and also the lady that called in about her daughter getting left behind or whatever. Well, long story short, 16 months ago, I had a below-knee amputation, so I am in a wheelchair part-time, and part-time I'm learning how to walk again. So they came, I called the ambulance, I think it was Sunday night, because I was having a lot of low sugar readings, like 2.2 and 2.7.
Okay.
So I was told by 811 to go to the hospital, right? So I did that. I called and they came and they brought the bed to my door, and I said, well, what about my wheelchair? Because I live in an apartment building, right? And I said, you got to take my wheelchair. And the paramedic said, no, don't bother with that. He said, you'll get a ride on. There are lots of wheelchairs and ambulances down there. That was the exact words he said, or she said. So I went off like a fool, not even thinking. Got down there. I was treated terrible. And I got down there. They checked my sugar once. They didn't ask if I wanted a glass of water, a glass of juice, something to eat, nothing. And they were not busy. There was 4 people in the waiting room at the Merge in St. Clair's. So they weren't busy. So a doctor came and saw me, ordered blood work, did the blood work, basically came back around 4:30 and said, well, Bonnie, blood work looks fine now, everything is good, you're good to go. And I said, well, am I going home in... His ambulance going to be called to bring me back home, right? And he said, oh, yes, we'll take care of you. 5 minutes later, they took care of me all right. 5 minutes later, they were coming in and telling me, well, you're discharged. And I said, yeah, but I need to get home. I don't have a wheelchair to get home in, so I need medical transport, right? And now, Patty, I live 1 minute away from St. Clair's. And it just well been if I was 10,000 miles away and trying to get home. I would have had more luck. They told me, they said, no, we cannot. Do you expect me to call an ambulance to take you home? But instead of calling an ambulance to bring somebody here with a heart attack. I said, no, I didn't say that. That's like putting words into my mouth, right? I didn't say that. I just said what the paramedic said to me. That, oh, yeah, you'll get home, don't worry. So long story short, 4:30 in the morning, I was very upset and crying. Sorry. But no. Yeah, but anyway, I went out and I said, okay, so it was taking me home. Oh, we can't take you home, right? But I said, yes, I know. But I was told I could get home. Stupid me, that's what I'm saying, for not bringing a wheelchair, right? It was stupid on my part, too. But they could have shown a little bit more compassion to some of their patients. There was a lovely man and woman emerged that night, 4 o'clock in the morning. There was a man and woman there, and there was 2 other people. That's all was in the waiting area of Emerge. So I went out. She said, well, where are you going? I said, I got to get home. I'm discharged. There's nowhere for me to go. And she said, well, I can give you a Tylenol and a Gravol, and you can sleep for a little bit, a couple hours, and then call a Go Bus. I said, that's not the point. I want to go home. I want to go home in my own bed. So this kind lady and gentleman passed me along $20, and she said to me, she said, my love, she said, would that get you home? I said, yes. I'm a 1-minute drive from the ambulance. So I live up in Center City, right?
And so all of this could have been avoided had your wheelchair been part of the delivery to St. Clair's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? And like there was no compassion because I was trying to get out of there. And like she said, she said, "Are you going to get home?" I said, "Well, I guess that's my problem, isn't it?" So this woman gave $20 to me for the taxi. She called a taxi. Still, I didn't know I was getting home. She called the taxi. I went out and I sat aboard a taxi. And she asked me where I went, and I told her. And when we got there, there was a lovely, tiny little lady that picked me up 4:30 in the morning. And because I was hoping the cab driver was going to be a big, burly guy so they could help me in my building, right? So once we parked there, she said to me, "So where do you go in?" I said, "Up those steps or in the wheelchair ramp." And I said, "My darling, I know you can't lift me over there, right?" I said, "I'll scoot along on my bum, come up the steps on my bum, come in here on my bum, unlock my door, and get my wheelchair." That's what I had to do. And that kind lady came in here on her own, and which she didn't have to do, and she brought the wheelchair out to me. Now, isn't that something?
It is. So it's kind of a difficult story to follow. So someone went to your house to get your wheelchair to bring it back to you so you could get home. Is that what you just said?
A taxi brought me.
Okay.
Which those two kind people paid for it. St. Clair's, two kind outpatients. I was an outpatient. So there was only one. I didn't know how to get out of St. Clair's. I need to get home, right? And that's what she kept saying to me. Well, you asked for a Tylenol a while ago. We can give you a Tylenol. You said you're nauseated. We can give you some Gravon. You can sleep until the GO bus goes on the road, right? I said to her, I said, "Yes, okay. There's no guarantee I'm going to get the GO bus at 7 o'clock in the morning, right? No guarantee whatsoever, because they could be busy with other people."
Understood. It's a real shame, and it could have been avoided so easily, which makes the story even more frustrating. Anything else you'd like to say, Juanita?
Well, it took me all this time to call in because I was so upset.
I understand.
It showed me how disabled I really am.
I appreciate your time, and hopefully this doesn't happen again to you or anybody else when it's easily avoided. I appreciate the call, Juanita. Take good care.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. I mean, really? Line number 2. Jackie, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. I just heard that conversation. It's pretty terrible and pretty simple solution to the problem that woman had. It sounds awful, her experience. But I'm actually calling in. Yesterday you had a caller that called in about his girlfriend who was self-hurting herself, and she brought her to the hospital. She got some treatment. The next day they let her out and brought her to a battered shelter. Well, one good thing is that they did bring her to a place that people are caring, but she self-hurt herself again, and it was worse, and so they kicked her out of there. Patty, like what I'm going through with my daughter, I called you last week to talk about her, and that she's got 2 mental health conditions, really serious, complicated ones, plus now drug and alcohol addictions, which makes everything even more complicated. And I did relay that because she's a difficult patient, they won't treat her. My opinion is, Patty, look, there are conditions that a doctor can hold you at the mental health hospital. One of the conditions definitely are if they are hurting themselves. Another condition is if they're going to hurt other people. And I know there's another condition that just eludes my mind right now. But Patty, when you bring someone in who's self-hurting themselves because you love them, you care about them, and he seemed like, they put her in a shelter because they were arguing, Look, I've done everything I could to get my daughter help, so I understand his desperation, and my problem is going on now over 7 years, and back and forth to the Waterford, back and forth to the police station, back and forth to the courts. It all costs huge money every time. Now this morning, I've got the police out searching for her again, and apparently her friend texted me and told me she was going crazy again. He described that she's going nuts right off her head. And so I had to call. I called the police. The only thing I have now that gives me a little tiny bit of answers and a little tiny bit of security is that you can call the police and do a wellness check. I'm after doing it a lot of times, Patty. I don't suspect that when this wellness check is completed that anything good will amount to it anyway. The only thing is that I'll know she's alive and that they have a record of what's going on with her. Patty, like, I don't know what a person, and family members being blocked out of it when this person is not making one good decision for themselves. And last week, as you described it, to another caller, a gentleman who was helping his friends with their son. You described it, and you know what? It's so fitting how you described it. It's so sad, but it's so fitting how you described it. It's a downward spiral of death. And when you've got health professionals that really should have the compassion and the caringness, like the Waterford Hospital should wrap these people and give them all the care, all the respect, even though it's difficult because they're not always respectful or doing the right things. It still doesn't matter. Their job is to be there to make sure she's not hurting herself, to make sure these things are supposed to be happening, but it's not happening. It's just not happening. And I'm hearing it from a lot of people, Patty. I've been listening to the open line since I've been a young child. My mother used to listen to it, and I listen to it every day. Every morning I listen to your show, and I hear, it's numerous times during a week that someone calls in with the same issue that I have. They can't get the proper mental health treatment for their loved one, and their family is falling apart. Patty, the dollar signs, if you look at the dollar signs that this is costing our family, costing everybody who loves her, are stressed out to the max. So we've got to go see our doctor now because we're stressed out. So that costs money on the system. Then we've got people left, right, and center in the same predicament that she's in, and they're dropping them out too. And by the way, when it comes to where they put them after they more or less say, no, you're going out of the hospital, they will phone around any place that they can get rid of them and dump them off to. It doesn't matter if they were abused women or not. If that shelter is open, that's where they go. And I've worked in healthcare, Patty, for a long, long time, and I worked in a position where I had to take in people for medical purposes. They lied to me about a woman one time. Oh, yes, she's got all kinds of medical appointments because one of the rules of staying where I worked was that they had to have medical appointment, and they, usually are not in the St. John's area. So they said, oh, yes, she's got medical appointments. As soon as she got to our place, I found out she never had nowhere to live. So they sent her there. And that really wasn't what the job that I was doing or the place I was doing, wasn't their role. And if they send you down to the gathering place, I got to say to that gentleman, at least they didn't send her into St. John's and then ditched her down to the gathering place, because she'd be another lost soul. You cannot give up. Society has to do something. It's costing us. The government the Minister of Health needs to look at this issue and figure out, we have to come together and figure out a solution, because everybody's paying in society for this. Everybody, whether they're breaking into your car or they're going down to jail, they're in jail, or they're down, God forbid, they end up down to the penitentiary because that's not fit to put a dog in. I wouldn't even put my cat in there. But the thing is, they do have a beautiful facility, Patty. They have a beautiful hospital, brand new hospital. But when you've got the directors dictating to the doctors how they can treat a patient, and no, la la la, and then when you talk to the director, and the director says, oh, I'm not responsible for that. The doctor is responsible for that. But the doctor's being told, no, budgets, out the door. I know how it goes with Eastern Health. Okay. I've worked there, and Patty, my heart goes out to everybody who's in my predicament, because, of course, I'm feeling it personally. But everybody in society we have to come together and find a solution, because this is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
It's getting worse right in front of our eyes. I appreciate the time, Jackie. I do have to get going. Based on yesterday's call, the most confusing thing about it for me is not only the lack of available services, it's how she ended up in Grace Sparks' house. I mean, that's for people, for women who are married or otherwise, children or otherwise, that have been abused, that are victims of domestic violence. So maybe they thought that her self-harm was inflicted by someone else. I don't know, because that part of the story really made very little sense to me. And I hope that Henry and the girlfriend are doing okay.
Sorry, Patty. I'm trying to give you an explanation of why they do that. They'll phone around any place.
Yeah, okay.
So that they can get rid of them.
And I understand that. But
my daughter was down at a gathering place. She's been at the women's shelter. She's been at a number of shelters around. And even though she's not, well, she has been through a lot of trauma in her life, like she was assaulted and that. The thing is, the place where she really needs the care, the love, and the attention before they can even do anything else, they need to keep her in, because she's going to keep hurting herself. Today, Patty, I had to call the police and do a wellness check on her because one of her friends called me and said she was going right off the head again. I'm here waiting for the police to call me back to let me know how she is.
It's all very sad, and I hope she's okay, and I appreciate your time, Jackie. Thank you. Be well.
Thank you for listening, Patty, and I appreciate it. And I'd just like to ask a final word. All your listeners out there, I implore you to contact your politicians, to contact the open line, do whatever you got to do, because this situation, there got to be some positive solution to it.
Thank you, Jackie. Take care. All right, let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Well, today is Double Day, and that's not your coffee order. Dean Ingram is the 2025 Visionary of the Year candidate representing this province, of course, raising funds for leukemia and lymphoma. And Dean joins us on line number 4. Good morning, Dean. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. Once again, thank you for having me on.
Happy to do it. So let's get into it. What's Double Day, and how are we doubling up donations today?
Well, in essence, there's a corporation, Cooperators Insurance and Investing, that have agreed that for today, any and all contributions that come in for the Visionary of the Year campaign will be matched by them. 10 becomes 20, 20 become 40, 50 become 100, and so on. So for those that haven't yet donated to myself, ideally, or one of the other Visionary of the Year candidates, I'd encourage you to do so today if you can. It's a way of doubling up the amount of funds that go to this very worthy cause, and today would be the ideal day to do so.
Absolutely. If we get a chance to see your donation doubled, obviously ideal. So it's not just cash donations. I learned recently that you can actually transfer some of your assets. Like you can transfer stock and securities. Is that actually the case?
There is. On each candidate's donation page, there is the option to actually do exactly that. So if you have maybe some stock in a company that's on the rise, ideally, you can do that, and the cash equivalent would be actually made available to this campaign. I guess in many ways it's similar to some other airlines have their points. You can donate your points to them for different causes. It really operates in the exact same way.
Okay, it's interesting. Someone just made me aware of that recently. So hopefully people take the opportunity to make a donation and see it double today. And bravo to the company that's going to match the funds today. Good for them. Very quickly, Dean, like on many other fundraising campaigns, people will set targets. Like we know last year, the Visionary of the Year raised more than $100,000. I guess there's winners raised more than $100,000. There's sometimes a running tab about how much someone has raised or one organization has raised. Is that the case with you folks? Because I couldn't find it.
No, they've made the decision that, I guess, in the nature of keeping things competitive, what you will, is that the running tallies for each candidate isn't available. I can find out mine, but I'm not able to find out what other candidates have raised. I got my own opinions on whether that should or shouldn't be the case, but that's a decision made by the organization. But I say right now that my goal that I set was $75,000. I'd love to raise, as I mentioned on a previous show, the equivalent of a quarter per individual in this province, which would come in at around $125,000. At present, I'm I'm very pleased with where I'm to, but there's a ways to go. The campaign wraps up on June the 7th. There are a number of events going on aside from donations. Tonight, for example, there is a trivia night at Clarenville Winging It. that there's some great prize involved, and all proceeds from that go directly to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. There's an online virtual auction that's happening, that's ongoing, that actually wraps up this coming Friday. And as well, on this weekend, there are two great events at McNiven's Pub and Eatery in St. John's, a brunch that starts at 11, I believe, and runs through. Again, all proceeds going to the Leukemia Lymphoma Association. And the Newfoundland Embassy, beginning at noon, will also be running a campaign. And, of course, there's also the raffle on the catered barbecue from Montana's on Cameron Road, and the draw for that is this coming Saturday. So now is an ideal time to get a ticket for that. There's only 1,200 printed, and make a nice summer evening prize for you and friends and family.
Good luck with it, Dean. If anybody's interested, you can go to the Leukemia Lymphoma website, but it's LLS, so that's Leukemia Lymphoma Society, LLScanada.org, and you can find the link there, or simply Google up Visionaries of the Year. It's an easy find. You can locate Dean Ingram's page right there as well. You got about 8.5 days, and of course, just one day today to see it doubled up. And bravo once again to the folks at Cooperators, McDonald Insurance and Investments for doing what they're doing today. Good luck with it, Dean. Anything else this morning?
Let me make one quick correction, is that the best way to make the donation wouldn't be through the LLS page. It would, if you type in visionariesoftheyear.ca, all visionaries, one word, .ca, and search under the 2025 candidates. You can do a drop-down menu to find Atlantic Canada, and from the inside of there, find my page directly. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on once again.
Happy to do it, Dean. Good luck.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Dean Ingram, Visionary of the Year candidate, and raising money, of course, leukemia or leukemia lymphoma. Let's take a break for the news. When we come back, ton of time left for you. Don't go away.
You're listening to a rebroadcast of VOCM Open Line. Have your say by calling 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626 and listen live weekday mornings at 9 a.m.
Welcome back to the show. Well, as we know, the National Energy Corridor is getting a lot of attention these days. Blake Schaefer has a long professional background working as a trader of BC Hydro and at TransAlta, of course, electricity company in Alberta. Now he's an associate professor of economics at the University of Calgary. He submitted a piece to Maclean's magazine, which I read, and decided to reach out to Dr. Schaefer to discuss the piece in the program. Good morning, Dr. Blake Schaefer. You're on the air.
Morning, Patty.
Glad you made time for the show. Thanks for doing it.
You betcha.
Okay, we can start with today and some of the hurdles, but this conversation is not new. So let's go back to 1961. Seems like a funny place to start, but that's really the birth of the energy corridor conversation. Take us back to 61.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you say, it's not new. I like to joke, my dad, who's actually an energy economist, he was working on this in the 1980s, and here I am 40 years later doing the same thing, sort of repeating the same arguments for and seeing if we can get a different outcome. Back in the 60s, Diefenbaker had this vision of a national energy system which would really be kind of pulling our hydropower from northern and remote areas into urban centers in Canada and really connecting up Canada in a north-south way. And then it changed with Pearson. He had a similar vision of bringing Canada together, but he was far more open to connectedness with the United States and opened up the power utilities to sign long-term contracts with the United States. And that really marked the new direction for Canada. Most utilities in Canada started doing more transactions with their southern counterparts, and that's where we are today. So when I was at BC Hydro, trading hydropower, a lot of our activity is seasonal exchanges and daily exchanges with California, more so than the rest of Canada.
And now we see that the province of British Columbia has entered into an agreement with the Yukon to provide hydroelectricity into the territory. Just to set the stage for context, just what is the value of electricity that we send to the United States and then upon return from the United States at a cut cost back in Canada?
Oh, geez. I have those numbers in the piece, I'm sure, so we can look that up. It's substantial. It's a substantial amount of trade. We're one of the largest electricity traders in the world. But what's interesting, what Canada benefits from is in the past few years, we've actually been a net importer at times. Like BC has been in drought, Quebec has been in a drought, pulling in. But despite pulling in more energy, the dollars also flow in our direction because Canada has that immense flexibility in its hydro systems to pick and choose when it pulls in power. And so trade's been quite beneficial with the United States, absolutely.
Yeah, in 2024, we exported $3 billion worth of electricity to the States, imported back roughly 2/3 of the volume at less than half the cost, so says your piece. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem at all. Let's get into it, because some of these things sound fundamental, but they're very complicated. And as you say in the piece, there's an intricate dance of buying and selling electricity. You can't really store it. Battery technology has improved dramatically, but you basically have to use it simultaneously. Let's get into one of the hurdles. Of course, you can produce the power, but then you got to get it to market. So building the transmission lines is a jurisdictional nightmare. It takes a long time, and it's really costly. Break that down for us.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the last comment there. It is a challenge. I mean, while there's immense benefits of trade, building those lines and all of the jurisdictional issues that are related to that, just building linear infrastructure, as we know in Canada, is challenging and costly. The benefits are greater when you're connecting regions that have really complementary resources. So, like you said at the outset, my background is BC and Alberta, and in BC you do have one of those methods of storage. You have those large hydro reservoirs, which you folks in Newfoundland and Labrador are familiar with as well. And in Alberta we don't. We have inflexible natural gas generation that tends to like to run all the time, and we have variable renewables, so wind and solar that run intermittently. And so connecting those allows us for example, in Alberta, you can balance off that intermittent wind and solar using the reservoirs in BC. So they import our power, use it for their own needs, and hold off running water through their dams. And then when the wind's not blowing here, they start releasing that water, serve their needs as well as ours. So they have that surplus capacity, that ability to generate. They hold back the water. That relationship is really beneficial on both sides. It allows Alberta to build more of what we are good at, that cheap natural gas generation and these cheap renewables that we have here allows us to exist with more of that, and allows BC to optimize its hydro and really benefit financially as well, because they're not doing this for free. They're making money on that trade as well. And so that's the type of relationship, and there's relationships like that across the country where you can connect a couple regions and you get those benefits of trade.
If you look across the country, it's remarkable that you'll have provinces that generate a lot of excess power and the provinces in close geographical proximity that have a dearth of power. So there's natural-born alliances or partnerships here, which has got to be the key, because transmitting power over long distances is, generally speaking, a bad idea given the power loss.
Yeah, I mean, losses are a real factor. They're manageable, though, considering how much the difference in value can be. So, for example, when we were sending power from BC to California, we might lose up to about 10% of the power along the way, which sounds substantial and wasteful. But when you're talking about sort of an order of magnitude or 10 times the price difference, it makes up for those losses. So, you have to be judicial about where you choose those connections, absolutely, but it can still be worthwhile. I think your point about provinces with a dearth and an excess nearby each other, it really speaks to this reality that in Canada, electricity is a provincial matter, and we really guard our autonomy quite fiercely, and people are skeptical sometimes of opening up. Grid operators are skeptical about giving up control to a neighboring region. Provincial governments are worried about jobs leaving the province rather than being in province, even if it means more costly electricity sometimes. And so those things are sort of holding us back. But I think that's the sort of national fervor for a bit more independence and greater or lessening our reliance on the United States. It's kind of opening us up to having these conversations now, maybe dropping some of those barriers and protectionism that we've had within our country.
It's difficult to craft a message of actual financial benefit. If I say, well, we can make X, then that could be a political argument, it could be a policy argument. But in this case, a little bit more difficult. I have mandated break times I have to take. Do you possibly have a chance to me put you on hold, come back? Because there's a few things I'd like to get into here. The different regulations in different provinces, some of those value messages that are hard to craft. Do you have time?
Absolutely, Patty. I've got a few more minutes.
Let's do that. I'll put Dr. Schaefer on hold. Let's take a break. We'll return right after this. Welcome back to the show. Let's rejoin Dr. Blake Schaefer on one. Dr. Schaefer, you're back on the air.
Hi, Patty.
Let's get into the value message. So not only might it be hard to quantify up front, but consequently might be hard to raise the capital. How does that complicate the energy corridor conversation?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest, so quantification, this is where modeling comes in. You can look at what the value is. There's certain areas that are harder to model. So the idea of, energy exchanges, you can put a price on that. That's clear enough. But those benefits to reliability, sort of being able to guard against these, what do we call it? I call them known unknowns with a Rumsfeld reference there. So, dealing with emergencies and the value that the transmission could potentially help with, those are harder. There's ways to model it. The funding it or financing it and the division of cost, that is a major hurdle because you're going to have differences in benefits when you connect different regions, and determining how to allocate those costs in a way that everyone agrees is a major challenge. This is where I think, though, the feds, when you think about what role the federal government has to play in this transmission conversation in electricity, which is really predominantly a provincial matter, I think this is where the feds come to the table. They can bring people together and really they can support it by providing dollars. And that's really what you're going to probably see the federal government do here, which is support interprovincial transmission by footing a large share of the bill to make that, that cost allocation decision a little easier to swallow for folks when the federal partner is taking a big share of it.
I'll use the word push because they're pushing electrification, and that's not a bad thing necessarily, but if they're the ones leading the charge, whether it be the provision of more and more electrical engineers, whether it be about building transmission and understanding the national best interest that they are promoting, maybe they belong at the table financially speaking. Then the regulatory. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. I mean, I'm here in Alberta. That sort of you hear the grumbles on the push to electrification, what that may mean for affordability. So the federal government coming in and then making that more feasible, making that more affordable for consumers, I think is a really important part of that. I think you're spot on there.
The voters will have an opinion on this, but so will the utilities. I mean, they've got to carve out some guaranteed business in their own provinces, and then it's the regulatory world. I mean, you're in Alberta, a deregulated sector. Private sector companies will assess their own risk and proceed with caution. Then you go to BC Hydro, where you worked, guaranteed cost recovery as a Crown Corporation. Can that be managed? Because that would be automatic pushback. Say, for instance, if Alberta doesn't want to do this, they'll simply say, well, you're infringing on our public sector right to operate the way they currently do. What do we do about the regulatory conversation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, starting with what you talked about, the winners and losers of trade, and that's a story with any trade agreement. The idea is the pie grows, but it's uneven division, and in some cases you're going to get losers from trade, even if the gains are bigger, and that's certainly going to be the case. If you look at BC, Alberta, there's going to be a mix. So if in Alberta, the thermal generators that tend to provide peaking resources, so power when nothing else is available, that would get supplemented with more power from BC at peak periods. And so those folks stand to lose, whereas who stands to gain here in Alberta? Well, consumers, of course, stand to gain, but they're really diffuse. You got millions of people versus a couple companies. They don't lobby as effectively. Renewable generators or those must-run generators, they stand to benefit because they have an outlet for their power. So you'll have a split even within the generators where you'll have winners and losers. And like anything, it tends to be those who stand to lose, especially small concentrated entities that stand to lose a lot, that'll have the loudest voices. So I think what's important there is to really understand that division of winners and losers and find ways to, in a sense, give opportunities for those who stand to lose from the connection, give them other opportunities. So in this case, it might be a firm who stands to lose in Alberta gets an opportunity in British Columbia from a connection, and that might drop the opposition to this thing that stands to benefit us as society.
The electricity demand that's forecasted to grow fairly dramatically over the course of the next 10, 20 years. Like, for instance, in this province, we've entered into a memorandum of understanding with the province of Quebec and Hydro-Quebec, and they need the power, say, for instance, at a hydroelectric facility yet to be built at Gull Island with 2,225 megawatts. They don't need it for domestic consumption. They have industrial projects they've had to shelve and ignore because they simply do not have the power. So that need, want, supply, demand conversation, economic upside, provision of power versus create jobs industrially for sure. That's got to be probably front and center here when we add in the federal government responsibility and regulatory issues and the transmission lines financing and stuff. There are power needs, and the only way to satisfy it is to make sure maximum generation, whether it be hydro, nuclear, solar, or wind, in addition to the traditional fossil fuels.
And, absolutely. And we've got to we've been in a period of about 20 years of really flat demand, energy efficiency, all those new light bulbs we have and other things. It means that we really haven't grown substantially in demand, and that's set to change with all the electrification, be it vehicles, but data centers, AI, all of this is really leading to projections of rapidly growing demand. And you're absolutely right. It means being able to look at also, all hands on deck when it comes to supply options, be it, local distributed versus large central stations and outlying areas. But the common theme there is connecting them to the grid. And that's where transmission is critically important. We really need the wires. That's going to be the bottleneck as we go through. Building supply is actually doable. It's connecting that is the thing that takes more time and can be more challenging.
And I'll just quick comment. Artificial intelligence and the data centers used to power it. I know there's an upside to the world with AI, but the amount of power consumed is off the charts. Sometimes it makes me wonder whether or not it's actually worthwhile, but I'll just leave it at that.
I hear you. I
certainly appreciate your time, Dr. Schaefer. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I'm actually making my first trip ever to Newfoundland this summer. It's the last province I've not been to, so I'm really excited to get out there.
Safe travels. You're going to love it.
All right. Take care.
All the best. Bye-bye. It's Dr. Blake Schaefer, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Calgary. Let's go to line number 2. Brian, you're on the air.
Good day, Brett. Eddie, thank you for taking my call.
Happy to do it.
I'm wanting to thank you for talking about my grandson there a couple of weeks ago, Brandon Joy, for the blind hockey.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. My world champ.
Yeah, I wasn't in town on that day, but I heard people telling me that you gave him a lot of good publicity, right?
Well, absolutely. You and I have talked in the past, and I know how proud you are of Brandon. And when you get a chance to play for your country, wear the maple leaf on the front, go to the Worlds, come home with a gold medal, that deserves all the accolades I can offer.
Well, he put a lot of work into it in the last 4 or 5 years. He made the team twice. In the last 2 years, he's been on that team. Another thing I would like to congratulate my grandson, Brandon. He was selected as the Senior Male Athlete of the Year for CBS.
Terrific. Fantastic. Yeah. Where's Brandon today? What's he doing?
Oh, God. Well, he goes he's finished university. He could be working. I don't know.
Okay. I just wonder what he's up to all the time.
Well, he works. He works at the Good Life fitness place. He doesn't get many hours there, but he's looking for a job. but unfortunately, with his disability, being blind and everything, there's not everybody who would like to hire him, right? But that's all I can say about that. Anyway.
And fair enough, but I think, if I'm Brandon, all I have to look at is the effort I've put in, the determination I've shown, and the ability to get things done by winning a world championship is a pretty good thing to put on your resume. So make sure next time you speak to him or see him, send along hearty congratulations to me. And if I can ever help you guys out, just let me know.
Yeah. Another thing, too, is unfortunately, my son started this hockey program about 10 years ago, right? And they're in difficulty trying to raise money. It costs about $15,000 to $20,000 a year for my son to put these blind kids through hockey school, right? And trying to raise money, it's difficult. And right now, my son owes a bill at the end of May that unfortunately he'll probably end up paying out of his pocket, which he did last year. and we have certain things on the go, like trying to raise money, okay? And there's one thing they got on the go is for $10 you could win a grant in your hand, they call it. And if you want to buy a ticket, there's 200 tickets out for $10, and if you win, you get $1,000. Right? Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, where can you find the tickets?
I was going to give you the email address.
Oh, good. Go right ahead.
Lisa, Lisa, Guest, 1979 at gmail.com.
Got it. Lisa Guest, 1979.
If you can afford $10, buy a ticket. Like he has to have this bill paid by the end of May, so he's trying to raise some money for that. Also, donations. Like if there's anybody out there that would like to keep these kids in hockey, unfortunately, it's come to a point that my son is almost thinking about giving it up. But I hope he doesn't, because he's got about he got 12 kids in the program, but there's probably about 7 or 8 kids that are up around 10, 12 years old, and they just love coming out there, right? Every Sunday, they have it up in CBS Arena, in the old arena, and it's just it's getting harder to raise money. And like I've spent hours and hours in different locations around town. I won't say the names of the places I've been in, but I've been in there trying to sell 50-50 tickets and sit down and watch people go to the counter and probably spend $20 on these I shouldn't say that, on these pull tickets. But yet they wouldn't come and give me $2.
Yeah, some of that's an addiction issue as well, isn't it? Brian, I really appreciate the time. For folks who'd like to buy one of those tickets, support Brian, enjoy to stay playing hockey, and or any of the other hockey players on that particular team or in that league in this province, Lisa Guest 1979 at gmail.com. Appreciate the time, Brian.
Can I say one other thing?
Quickly, I have to get going.
If anybody would like to make a donation to the blind hockey, the address is Newfoundland, spelled right out, blind ice hockey at gmail.com.
And hopefully some people will consider doing it. I appreciate your time, Brian. Stay in touch.
Yeah, and thank you for taking my call, sir.
Anytime. All the best.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break for the news. Don't go away.
The Tim Powers Show. Join the conversation weekday afternoons at 4 p.m. on your VOCM.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 4. Good morning, Woody French. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you this morning?
That's kind. How about you?
Great.
Good.
Patty, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to give you a bit of an update concerning the Canadian Peacekeepers Veterans Association. As some of your listeners may know, we are a group of veterans that have served in the United Nations on peacekeeping missions, and certainly with the NATO forces in Europe, where I had the pleasure of serving in Germany for 3 years. And we now have a Peacekeepers Jeep. Some of your people may have seen it around town. And what we're doing is we're trying to attract veterans that are having problems, mostly with PTSD, and try to help them get reintegrated back into the community, that type of thing. And as you know, Patty, among our veterans from Afghanistan and other different missions that they've been on, we have, unfortunately, the highest per capita suicide rate rates among these veterans, and we're trying everything we can do to help them. And certainly one of the things that we've done is participate in the Bay Wheels car show, which is coming up this weekend in the Bay Roberts at the arena there. And we will be there with veterans and our Jeep, and our goal, of course, to meet other veterans, and also, Patty, to raise funds for the food bank in that area. Last year we raised $1,000 plus our Jeep trailer full of food for the food bank, and we're certainly hoping to surpass that this year. And it's for us, it's part of our mental health progress, and also to help other veterans is what it's all about. So we're hoping that the folks will come out and say hello to us, have a chat, bring a non-perishable item for the food bank, and come out and see some fine vehicles and spend a bit of time with us. And we'd certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure the folks that use the food bank would appreciate it as well.
No doubt. I've seen the pictures of the vehicle, and it's pretty cool. So even if you just want to have a look at it, make sure that the fundraiser is successful enough to do exactly what Woody describes. Anything else people need to know, Woody?
No, other than that, we're fairly active with that, and certainly the plans that I have. I dropped up one day to see Brian Medore, my buddy in the newsroom there, and unfortunately Brian wasn't there. So I want to come up one of these days and take you and Brian for a ride in the Jeep, and let you be familiar with it, and just to have a chat with you, have a coffee, that type of thing. But just to encourage people that are out there, just to say hello to a veteran, thank him or her for their service, and we really appreciate the support for sure. 100%,
Woody. Appreciate your time as usual.
Thank you so much, buddy, and all the best to you. Have a safe day.
You too, Woody. Stay in touch.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. That's Woody French, Peacekeeper Veterans Association. All right, here. Probably going to try to get to the break pretty much on time. Don't want to shortchange. Our two callers are in the queue. Plenty of feedback on the East-West Energy Corridor as described by whether it be the government and or Dr. Blake Schaefer, our guest, to talk about some of the complexities and some of the hurdles that are yet to be faced. And just one more time, we talked about the fact that Tony Wakeham, the leader of the official opposition, asking for the government to, pump the brakes as it pertains to the possibility for this energy corridor and what it might mean for the Upper Churchill Gull Island 2 transmission projects memorandum of understanding. It's something we've been saying for a while. I don't know if there's time to delay necessarily, as opposed to where I would start is even when we talk to Dennis Brown, who's the chair of the 3-person oversight committee. Their mandate is fairly narrow. It's only about what's on the pages of the MOU. But if things are changing, and the possibility for this energy corridor is very real, I think, but to include what that might look like and how it might impact this fast track towards definitive agreements by sometime next April and retroactive benefits to January 1st this year, just to include how it might impact the upside for this province, I think is important. So maybe to broaden the mandate for that 3-person oversight committee to include what the potential for this might look like as it pertains to the numbers and the benefits as described by then Premier Fury, I think that's probably pretty important. Let's take a break. When we go back, another segment left for you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 5. Good morning, Kim Churchill. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning, Patty. How are you doing?
Great today. How about you?
I'm feeling pretty aggravated, to be honest. For the most part, I've been pretty silent since Carter was moved from elementary school to junior high in 2023. And after what has transpired in the past week, I honestly can't stay silent anymore. As many of your listeners probably know, it's our family that fought for 6 years and spent nearly $100,000 for Carter's human rights, and went to a 9-day judicial hearing. We received a legal ruling of discrimination by the Newfoundland Labrador English School District in 2023. And I can honestly say that the neglect and the suffering that Carter's experienced was horrendous. And what they've been doing to him since starting junior high is on a whole new level of cruelty. And just to give you some context, when he was in grade 6, before they moved him from elementary school to junior high, we had requested as teachers to provide us with an idea of what grade level Carter was in for each of his subjects, because the entire grade 4, grade 5, and grade 6 that he was at that school, he was not given any grades, okay? He was receiving IEs, which is insufficient evidence. And so we wanted an idea before he went to junior high, exactly where is he? And they told us that he was learning somewhere between kindergarten and grade 3. Okay, now he's in grade 6, going to grade 7, but he's learning between kindergarten and grade 3. Of course, we know that's due to the years of discrimination, language deprivation, being socially isolated, not having access to a teacher that could speak in his language, etc. So essentially, he was forced to skip his elementary learning. And of course, everyone knows that these are the critical years that build the foundation for future success academically. And how exactly is a child expected to skip multiple grades and then achieve grade level curriculum when they're tested? So Carter was put in grade 7. And we can expect it, actually, that the teachers would continue to meet Carter where he was, meaning that, you know, he was doing math in grade 6. He was learning his multiplication. And we expected that that would continue on. However, we were told that they were forcing him to learn grade 7 curriculum. So how does a child go from learning multiplication and division to being taught the concept of degrees, angles, concepts of X and Y coordinates? So obviously we were very, very concerned and upset by this. So we met with the classroom teachers, we met with the principal, we met with the director of the schools, and we stated all of our concerns and what this was doing to Carter. And they all ignored us. In fact, the end of the school year, we had an individual education plan meeting, and one of his teachers actually stated to us that she did not agree with the decision that NL Schools had made, and she had expressed her concerns to them, okay? Because we had asked the teachers, like, how can you allow this to happen? We know Carter is not achieving grade level curriculum. He's well behind, and you're literally setting him up for failure. So then, grade 8, which is the current year he's in now, we had at the very beginning of the year an individual education plan again for Carter, and we cited all of our concerns, and they would not include or address any of them in his IEP, and we refused to sign it. Because as parents, we are not going to sign something that we don't agree to, and we learned our lesson when we were forced to go through that human rights hearing, that you don't sign an IEP unless you want specifically what's in that that you agree to, what specifically is written in that. So here he is now in grade 8, and he's expected to learn the grade 8 curriculum, which now with math is integers and fractions, and, you know, doing square roots. And, you know, he's learning a different language. We as his parents would love to sit down with him and be able to help tutor him and teach him and give him that extra support that most parents do with their children. We can't do that with Carter. And so this is just adding, like, the severe frustration that's already growing. And they're teaching him chemistry. He just had a chemistry exam or test, and he had to learn the periodic table. Like, it's absolutely insane what they are doing. And so to add to all of this concern, we find out in the past week that now somebody has made the brilliant decision to send this classroom to Holy Heart High School. As I mentioned, Carter's in grade 8. He's supposed to stay at St. Paul's Junior High for another year in grade 9. There's only 2 children in that classroom that are technically, I guess, due to their chronological age, required to go to Holy Heart, and Carter's not one of them. But because there's 2 children, I guess, that are going to Holy Heart, they figured, well, we'll send all of them to Holy Heart. So we got a phone call saying that this was a decision that they were making. And we adamantly refused. We said, no, we don't agree with this. Carter is, you know, because of the years of deprivation, he doesn't have the emotional maturity. He certainly doesn't have the worldly concepts and understanding that most kids that are hearing have. And forcing them to go to high school is going to be detrimental. So I'm not interested, Patty, in further exasperating the problems that they've already created for him. And it's completely not sensible. Would you believe the day after we wrote our letter stating that we did not agree with this, the director of deaf and hard of hearing shows up in my son's classroom with the children and says to them all, talks to them about Holy Heart and how there's a couple kids going to Holy Heart. And you have a choice. says to Carter and the other kids, you have a choice. Would you like to go to Holy Heart in the fall? Well, what do you think the kids are going to say?
Yeah,
let's stay with our friends. Let's go to Holy Heart. It's a brand new school. That's exciting. Carter puts his hand up. Yeah, I want to go. He comes home to me that afternoon, tells me, Mom, I'm going to Holy Heart this fall. I'm looking at him and I'm thinking to myself, staying calm so he does not get any indication how livid I actually was. And I explained to him, I said, Carter, you're only 14 years old. Like, children your age do not make these decisions. And we need to, talk to your dad about this. Not letting him know that decision had already been made. Not letting him know that he is a minor and he is not given the opportunity to make life-changing decisions. How dare NL schools put that on my child? How dare they do that after I had wrote that letter and my husband disrespect us to the point that they would go to my child's school and speak to him? This is not about programming, Patty. So let's be really clear. This is not about education. These children are not being sent off to Holy Heart High School in the fall because it's going to help them with their education. They're being sent off because of budgetary reasons, okay? So we all know that there's been a long time complaint about not being able to get teachers who are qualified with ASL. And so now they're looking at, we got another school now that we've got to supply resources to. How are we going to do this? Well, let's just put them all in the one school. And I also heard that not only are they going to put them in the same school, but they're going to be put in a hearing classroom with interpreters. That is not going to work. My child needs to be in a dedicated classroom. He's still learning his language. He has a right to stay in the junior high system. And for them to be able to do this behind our backs is completely, utterly ridiculous, and as I said, disrespectful, because they are not listening to the parents. We've asked for a parental meeting with all the parents when this happened, because all the parents got upset. And I put an email out to the director of Deaf and Hard of Hearing requesting that we can have a group parental meeting. He comes back saying, no, citing privacy concerns, we cannot do that. Then all the parents turned around and sent out another email saying, we don't have any of these concerns. We're all forfeiting, basically, any privacy issues, we're okay with that. We need to have this meeting, and we need to have it immediately. We're still waiting. We're like 20 days away from school ending. We don't know what's happening to our children this fall. How can we go all summer with that amount of stress and worry, and we don't even know what's happening? Will our kids have teachers? Will our kids have a school? Where's the school going to be?
For that director to put Carter on the spot like that is completely irresponsible, completely unacceptable. And just sometimes we all use acronyms when we're familiar with it. An IEP is an individualized education program, which we're actually talking about in broad strokes in the education system, but even more importantly for students like Carter. Before we run out of time, final message, Kim, because we're edging up against 12 o'clock.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. So, it's interesting because not too long ago, we had asked them to keep Carter back in East Point Elementary because of all the reasons I've already stated. And they refused, stating, once again, that because of chronological age, they had to go to a junior high school. So it seems that when, policies and procedures are extremely important to abide by when it suits them. This is not something that's apparently suiting them anymore because they've changed the policy and procedures to allow these kids to go to a high school when they're not even of age. So, I'm sick and tired of the lack of apathy that's being shown to these children and to my son. And when is common sense finally going to have a role?
Kim, I appreciate the concerns and your time this morning. Keep me in the loop if anything changes or happens, sir.
Thank you, Patty. I thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Boy. All right, good show today. Big thanks to all hands who support the program, and we will indeed pick up this conversation again tomorrow morning right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, David Williams, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.